Blood for the Blood God, Skulls for the Skull Throne, Heresy for the Heresy Heads. You know, I love a good, fluffy army. An army with a really strong theme or backstory. A theme that personifies and bleeds into every single aspect of how they play. I will always prefer an army with a banging narrative or theme than a bland, take all the best bit style of army building. In fact, this week we had an amazing conversation around this in our Discord, which you'll find a link to down in the description below. We were talking about the story of Zenjin Khan of the White Scars, who allied themselves with the Night Lords during the Thramas Crusade against the Dark Angels. Also known as when the Dark Angels and Night Lords annihilated a whole sector just to try and get each other. The White Scars initially sided with the Night Lords out of a debt of loyalty to the War Master, and fighting numerous battles alongside the Night Lords, but always honourably, and sometimes giving quarter to the defeated Dark Angels. And they also saved numerous of the First Legion from the 8th Legion's notorious skinning pits. But eventually, seeing how dishonourable and craven the Night Lords were, the White Scars switched sides during a key battle, saving the Dark Angels, defeating the Night Lords, and then swearing death oaths to Lion L. Johnson himself. Now there is a cracking theme. If you rocked up to a table with a White Scars army themed around that, I'd probably kiss you. My wife has just informed me that that's probably inappropriate, so instead I would just give you a firm, hearty handshake. And on that note, meet AJ. AJ is another fabulous member of our Heresy community here in Scotland, and he has the fluffiest and, dare I say it, goriest World Eaters army going. AJ is a huge fan of the 12th Legion and all their gory, brutal gloriousness. AJ and I have chatted quite consistently since 3rd edition dropped, and I really love his approach to both building his army and playing the game. It does not matter what he's facing. It could be an armour-heavy Iron Warrior siege division, a horde of Mechanicum automata, or even a magnificent Warlord Titan himself. His approach will always be the same. He's always gonna play it like a World Eater. Move forward, engage the enemy, rip and tear until it is done. In fact, I think this picture from this year's Horus Heresy event sums up AJ's approach to the game quite nicely. We've only ever had a chance to play once against each other before, his Madern Berserkers being led by everyone's best boy Kharn himself, hurtling headlong into my lines of artillery and alchemical death. I won that game, but only just. Both our legions absolutely decimated each other with only Kharn left standing of the World Eaters. And I have no doubt that that single model would have soloed the remainder of my army, having been given the chance. So, when the chance for a rematch came up, AJ gunned his chain axe and threw down the gauntlet. And me being me, eagerly accepted. So for this game, we pulled our list together in secret, aiming to build a 3,000 point list each. So knowing that I was going to be facing a horde of blade-wielding nutters, you might think that old Shawnee boy decided to play it safe and keep them at a distance with tons of artillery and long-range weapons. Well, your boy decided to hush that noise completely, and also built an army designed to get up close and personal. When military historians in decades to come find this video, they will say that this was Sean's first and greatest mistake. Starting with my Crusade Primary Detachment, my army is led by Samoth the Entroper, a praetor in Tartaros Terminator armour. He is armed with a pair of dual lightning claws for an extra pair of attacks, and of course that rather wonderful rending 6+ special roll. On a hit roll of a 6, the claws will auto-wound an opponent with an AP of 2, so even dreadnoughts need to watch out when fighting this guy. Samoth will bring 2 commanders with him, the first being Centurion Imbal Taktarov, known as the Lord of Trenches to his enemies. He's pretty tooled up with an Alchem Caster, a Power Scythe, Melta-Bombs and a Vixella to help with combat resolution. I've also given him the Prime Benefit Paragon of Battle to help with those pesky Weapon Skill 5 model World Eaters love so much. Finally, we have Malak Hamavet, my army's Moritat, a highly maligned figure by his allies. I absolutely love him. He's armed with a pair of overcharged Volcate Serpentas, Rag Grenades and a Melta-Bomb. He also has a jump pack for some high-speed killy nonsense. Not renowned for his bravery or his leadership skills, he simply wants to burn enemies to ash, cackling all the while. I'm taking 2 troops options in the primary detachment, starting with Squad Iota, a massive 20-man tactical squad led by a sergeant with a power sword and a plasma pistol. They also come equipped with a Vixella. Most importantly though, I've given these lads the prime benefit True Believers. Essentially, these guys are so insanely dedicated to the cause that nothing phases them. They'd rather die than retreat, and so can never accrue statuses, and their leadership in Cool is unmodifiable. However, they are malefic, so commanders cannot join them unless they are also malefic. Also, they will still get status checks as normal, but instead of taking a status, they lose D3 models. This unit is designed to hold the rear ground, forcing the enemy to wipe them out completely, something I'm sure AJ will take great joy in doing. My second tactical squad, Squad Gamma, will be a bit more normal, being 10 man strong with a Vox and a Vexilla, and led by a sergeant with an Alchem caster and a power sword. I'll also take 3 rhinos in my primary detachment, one with a heavy flamer, one with a havoc launcher, and one with a multi-melta. All of them have dozer blades, and 2 will have hunter killer missiles. They'll ferry my smaller squads into battle. My first detachment is an Apex detachment unlocked by my Praetor, unlocking an Army Vanguard, and I'll be filling one slot with the Day of Tears and Mourning, my beloved Mortis Poisoner squad. 10 man strong, all have Alchem Flamers and Chainswords, while the Sergeant has a regular Flamer, Phosphex bombs and Melta bombs. They'll be going in a Rhino and aim to get as close to the World Eaters as possible to melt them in alchemical death. I've also given them the prime benefit Combat Veterans. Next up is a Shock Assault detachment, and I'm taking Harbinger Squad, a 10 man Destroyer Assault squad. All have 2 hand flamers and rag grenades. 2 have been upgraded with Destroyer missile launchers, which absolutely melt Marines and have the rather tasty Phage T rule. The Sergeant also has Phosphex bombs, cause everybody loves Phosphex bombs. Next is the Death Guard's Reaping Host detachment, and I'm filling all of the slots. First, another tactical squad, Squad Theta, 10 man strong with a Vox and Vexilla, and led by a sergeant with a chainsword and a bolt pistol. I'll be using these guys for a logistical benefit. Next, a small 5 man heavy support squad, Squad Lambda, all armed with multi-meltas. These guys are quite pricey, so I'm hoping they'll melt some tanks or Terminators. My ever faithful Grave Warden Terminators, the Tall Grasses, are next. Armed with assault grenade launchers and chain fists, one has been upgraded with a heavy Alchem Flamer. These boys are fantastic at volley firing and would no doubt mess up some 12th Legion with their various poison armaments. Finally, the logistical benefit unlocks a retinue slot for me, and I'm taking the Silent Shroud, 3 Grim Death Shroud Terminators. Armed with Alchem Casters, Melta Bombs and Heavy Warsides, these guys are Weapon Skill 5 and Eternal Warrior 1, and can hit like an absolute truck. My final detachment is an Armoured Fist detachment, and I'm bringing 3 Land Raiders. First, Curse You All Men, armed with a twin Heavy Flamer, a Pinto-mounted Heavy Flamer, and twin Last Cannon Sponsons. Second, For Whom the Bell Tolls, armed with twin Last Cannons, a Pinto-mounted Multi-Melta, and twin Last Cannon Sponsons. And finally, the Dirge of Cerberus, my beloved Land Raider Achilles, armed with a front-mounted quad launcher, twin Multi-Melta Sponsons, and a Pinto-mounted Multi-Melta. Sadly, Games Workshop have still not returned my calls about giving this beast Phosphex shells. This list is all about getting as close as possible and unleashing a torrent of Phosphex, Melta and Flame-based Armageddon. AJ, however, brought an almost identical list to the one he brought last time, which is like the Horus Heresy equivalent of looking you dead in the eyes and saying, "Come at me, bro." AJ's Primary Crusade detachment also starts with a high command, and it's the man, the myth, the legend himself, Kharn the Bloody, our first named character ever in a Hopeless Heresy battle report. Naturally, the barmy bugger is armed with Gorechild Reforged and a plasma pistol, and naturally wants to close the distance incredibly fast to make use of that devastating Weapon Skill 7 and 5 attacks. Next up is a Centurion armed with a combat shield and a power axe, and AJ will naturally be giving him Paragon of Battle to make him even more of a menace in close combat. The combat shield also makes him faster in challenges, spelling a big problem for my commanders. AJ's final command option is one of my favourite units in Heresy, the Mortificator. Charged with tending to the Legion's dreadnoughts, this guy is a brutal, bloody multi-tool of a unit. He comes with a bolt pistol, a servo arm, and a corpuscent stave, which is a brutal piece of kit, especially against vehicles and dreadnoughts. AJ's first troops choice is a 10-man Despoiler squad, armed with chain axes cause, World Eaters, while 2 of them have power swords. They have a Vexilla and a Nuncio Vox, and the Sergeant has a pair of lightning claws for extra melee madness. AJ will also be using his favourite prime advantage on these guys, Interdiction Cadres. Essentially, these guys lie on the battlefield under the mud, dust and rubble, and at a key moment can explode from hiding and charge one of my units. Absolutely lethal. Next up, AJ has taken 2 identical tactical squads, both kept fairly bare bones, although all have chain bayonets and a Vexilla, because even a World Eater's Tactical Marine wants to hack up his enemies. That +1 attack on the charge and Shred 6+ can make them surprisingly lethal. Next up is an Armoured Fist attachment containing 2 identical Land Raider carriers, both featuring twin las cannons and twin las cannon sponsons. These behemoths have one job: to ferry in the Nutters in AJ's Shock Assault detachment, 2 identical squads of Rampagers. Both are 10 men strong and are led by champions with paired Phalanx blades for extra attacks and power armour hacking lunacy. The squads themselves also have Phalanx blades, except for 2 who will carry mighty meteor hammers into battle. These monsters are all momentum based brutality. At weapon skill 5 and 3 attacks each, Rampagers will mess up any unit unfortunate enough to meet them in close combat. AJ's Mortificator unlocks a Dreadnought Talon, and AJ's gone nuts, filling all 3 with Contemptor Dreadnoughts with paired Gravis Power Fists and twin Heavy Flamers each. This has become AJ's signature, and his ethos is you may kill 1, you may even kill 2, but 1's gonna get you, and he's gonna mess you up, son. Finally, AJ is taking a Lord of War and bringing his exceptionally well painted Fellblade Super Heavy Battle Tank. This thing is a monster, with its twin Accelerator Cannon and hull mounted Demolisher Cannon. And cause AJ's World Eaters love a bit of close fire support, it's also covered in Heavy Bolters and Gravis Heavy Bolters. In our last game, this thing took names every single turn, but was eventually slain by a sustained artillery bombardment and Grave Warden Chainfists. But there's no artillery this game. AJ will be sticking with the Legiones Astartes version of the World Eaters, representing them in the early Heresy, slightly less insane. They have the Violence Incarnate special rule, giving them an extra attack on the charge, and their unique reaction, Brutal Tide, lets them charge an enemy who shoots at them. And finally, in typical World Eaters fashion, their unique gambit Violent Overkill allows them to overspill wounds outside of the challenge, hacking apart enemies after they've mulched their commander. I love this list. This list is 12th Legion to a T, all close range brutality and brilliance. I absolutely love it. I knew that I had to keep the Rampagers and Kharn at bay, and all the while dueling at medium range with the Fellblade. I knew if I could get to the Fellblade early on, that would remove a huge portion of AJ's army's effectiveness. Day of the game, and our forces would meet in the bombed out ruins of a city we both had no doubt just bombed out ourselves. We rolled for mission and deployment from the Liber Objectum unofficial mission pack, which you can find for free in the description below. Deployment would be Stronghold. One side would be setting up in a standard rectangular deployment, while the other would be a very aggressive and constrained arrowhead, separated by a no man's land of 24 inches. When we rolled off, AJ gleefully took the arrowhead deployment, the butcher's nails no doubt kicking in already. Our mission would be Onslaught. Each side would place a single objective in their opponent's deployment zone, worth 5 victory points. However, the objective in your own deployment zone cannot be scored or contested by you, but Vanguard can still be scored from it. This mission demanded we move forward and take ground from our opponent, something which probably sat fine with both of our legions. The game would last 5 turns, and all secondaries were active except for First Strike. Instead, any kills on the first turn were worth 1 victory point each, and Vanguard units could add their Vanguard bonus to these kills. This was only in effect for the first turn. Finally, and in one of my favourite parts of this mission, deployment is done a bit differently. Instead of slamming down your whole army in one go, each of us would place a unit each in a step deployment in a set order, going Lords of War, Armour and Heavy Transports, Troops and Supports, Elites, Shock Assault and War Engines, Commands, High Commands, and Fast Attack and Transports, with units mounted in vehicles being deployed alongside their vehicles. This gave the deployment a real tactical back and forth, which I think would be amazing on more missions. AJ's deployment was confrontational in the extreme, the Fellblade and Dreadnoughts forming the literal spear tip of his forces. The Rampagers went in the Land Raiders with his Centurion and Kharn respectively, while his Tacticals hid in the shadows of the heavy vehicles. His Mortificator joined the Southern Tacticals close at hand to enact any repairs needed to the Land Raiders or the Fellblade. Meanwhile, AJ's Despoilers went into reserves, hidden somewhere on the battlefield, ready to explode out and ambush my forces. My deployment was a lot more disparate, very aware of the carnage a Fellblade could do at long range. I utilised cover where I could, placing my Land Raiders in a loose line across the whole board. The Achilles contained the Heavy Melta squad, the central Land Raider my Praetor and Death Shroud, and my topmost my Grave Wardens and Centurion. My rhinos used whatever cover was available, with 2 containing tactical squads, while the lead rhino held my poisoners. Malak Hamavet and his attendant destroyers hid in some ruins, ready to launch forward when needed. Finally, my huge True Believer tactical squad were dumped front and centre, ready to engage where needed. We agreed that all the smashed walls were terrain features that blocked line of sight, but could be moved through with a 2-inch penalty, and would be dangerous terrain for vehicles. The larger ruins would be medium terrain and offer a 5+ cover save to those fully within them. Lastly, we both placed our own target objective in the other's deployment zone, and hilariously placed them in identical spots. This was going to be one hell of a bloody game. AJ had first turn, however, I successfully rolled a 6 to seize the initiative and decided that I would take the first turn instead. This, military historians will say, was Sean's second and greatest mistake.
It was funny, Kharn would think afterward, or at least before afterward became nothing but the howling white pain of the nails and the endless torrents of red and black and broken bones that lay before him, but he couldn't remember who fired first. The War Master had ordered the 12th and the 14th to the world of Triptos' Lament with orders to scour all life from its surface. The Death Guard had carpet-bombed the cities with their poisons and their phosphates, black clouds of death liquidating all life within, and what survivors could flee or fight were met by the chain axes of the World Eaters. It was a brutal symmetry that Kharn admired, but something had gone wrong. Now in the ashes of the last city to fall, something had happened. A shot had been fired between the forces and things had escalated quickly. It was maybe an overly grim Death Guard, keen to see their particularly fecund method of death continue. Maybe the Moritat. Kharn had never approved of Moritats. But more likely, it was one of his own men. When the nails called, you answered, and of late, the nails' call had been particularly vicious. That mattered little now though, because now both forces were at each other's throats. This was pointless, Kharn thought. This was distraction. Kharn needed his warriors back with the Primarch to make for Calth, for the wider war. This would need ending quickly. Climbing into his Land Raider, Kharn grinned as the nails kicked in. Kharn was incredibly skilled at ending things quickly.
Turn 1 saw my Death Guard grind through the ruins of the city, forming an armoured line like a grim chain of armour and treads. The Achilles and Destroyer Rhino spearheaded the southern approach, the Land Raiders and Tacticals covered the centre and the north. One of my Land Raiders hit a particularly solid bit of rubble though, losing a hull point in its headlong rush forward. Harbinger Squad leapt to more advantageous cover, keen to keep the objective in sight in case the World Eaters got through. With there still being a large distance between both forces and the ruins impeding firing lines, my shooting was anemic to say the least. The Achilles launched a frag shell at the one visible dreadnought, which exploded harmlessly on its armour, making the already furious machine even angrier. My first turn ended quickly with no score. AJ faced similar issues, with both our armies focused on short-range combat and the battlefield being so long and heavily ruined. The dreadnoughts all rushed forward, barrelling through the rubble and walls, their massive claws flexing in anticipation of violence. The Tacticals ran to grab cover, while the Land Raiders followed behind the sprinting war machines. The massive Fellblade rumbled forward, dust vibrating off every surface. Its gunners clocked the Land Raider Achilles in the ruins and fired both the cannons into the tank. Explosions swallowed the heavy vehicle and armour flew from it in every direction, leaving it with a single hull point. It was severely damaged but still in the fight, and its gunners fired their trio of devastating multi-meltas into the super heavy tank. Sun-bright energy poured into the Fellblade, melting armour and fouling circuitry. Smoke billowed from its wounds as the Achilles dealt a mammoth 6 damage in its return fire. AJ looked a little shocked and was only grateful he hadn't pushed right into the Land Raider's melta range. Kharn ordered his gunners through gnashing teeth to light up the Death Guard armour, and a pair of crimson lascannon beams stabbed into Kershua men, but the vehicle popped its smoke launchers, fouling the aim of the oncoming World Eaters. With no charges being possible, World Eaters turn 1 also ended promptly. However, the distance between both armies was closing fast, and soon the carnage would begin in earnest. The score sat at 0 each. The Dirge of Cerberus ground forward, its tracks filled and smoke billowing from its abused engine, intent on bringing down the Fellblade. Its assault ramp smashed down and a squad of Astartes armed with multi-melta stormed forward. Being Death Guard, so long as they moved no more than 4 inches, they would still maintain their heavy bonus on their multi-meltas, making them all a terrifying strength 9. Plus, the Achilles and the Melta squad were now all in Melta range, meaning there was a potential 32 damage heading the Fellblade's way. However, it was not to be, as with a roar, the dust on the ground exploded as white armoured Astartes rose, gunning their chain axes and screaming the name of their lord Angron. An interdiction cadre of despoilers suddenly appeared and charged headlong into my Melta Marines, easily closing the distance and locking them up in combat. With their multi-meltas too cumbersome to allow them to escape, the support marines now had to face the frothing madmen in close combat. AJ, you cunning son of a bitch. This was devastating and meant that the Fellblade would easily survive another turn. The rest of their army, seeing their beleaguered brother's plight, swept further into the battlefield, now able to draw lines of fire on the approaching 12th Legion. The destroyers flew high over the rooftops, scanning for targets in the rubble. Their missile launchers launched rad missiles at an oncoming dread, but to little effect. The Dirge of Cerberus unloaded its array of multi-meltas again, but the Fellblade's tough armour warded away the superheated energy. Meanwhile, its siblings rained last cannons into the oncoming dreads. Several smashed into the northern dread, severely wounding it, while the central dreadnought took 6 direct hits to its core. Its plasma reactor overloaded and the machine detonated, showering its brothers in shrapnel and gore, further wounding them. In the sudden melee the heavy support squad found themselves in, the World Eaters easily hacked apart 3 of the Death Guard. And while the wrong-footed Astartes did pull down 2 of their opponents, the weight of numbers was too much. They routed and fled backward, while the spoilers rained bolt pistol shots into their back, but to little effect. This was huge. One of my main anti-tank units had been effectively nullified, and suddenly my whole southern approach was in great danger. I had taken out a dreadnought and severely wounded the other 2, but things were now looking very, very dicey. AJ had his mortificator see to the wounded Fellblade, his servo arm easily repairing some of the damage dealt by the Achilles. Killing it now seemed almost impossible. The World Eaters, seeing the despoilers' victory, drove forward in a wave of blood-stained armour. Much of AJ's forces turned south, seeing how suddenly exposed I was. They knew the Rhino contained my Poisoner squad, a squad that could easily annihilate any infantry they happened across, and AJ wasn't going to let them run rampant through his own lines. His Contemptors split up, one rushing north while the other barreled into the ruins of the central warehouse. It could see the fleeing Death Guard and was intent on not letting them escape. The Northern Land Raider hurtled forward, barely pausing before its assault ramp exploded open, and a roaring squad of rampagers led by the Centurion stormed onto the battlefield. The nails were biting hard, and these madmen were hungry to rend apart any who they fell upon. My Morata and destroyers, in typically callous fashion, rocketed away, leaving the tactical squad to face down the World Eaters alone. The Fellblade fired its cannons once again into the Achilles, breaching its engine block and shattering the vehicle utterly. It then aimed its heavy bolters and demolisher cannon at the Rhino and tore the vehicle to shreds with explosive fire. The veteran poisoners flooded from the burning vehicle, wrong-footed but holding their nerve. Last cannon beams showered my Northern Land Raider, tearing hull armour from it in bright white flashes, not even its smoke launchers being able to save it from the deluge. With targets finally in range, the despoilers smashed into the poisoners and the Contemptor bulldozed into the heavy weapons team. The Centurion and the Rampagers stormed toward the tactical squad, who held their ground and formed a cohesive firing line. 60 explosive bolter round shells smashed into the Berserkers, killing several and wounding another, but even this hailstorm was not enough to stop the World Eaters. They crashed into the tactical marines with the force of a hurricane. The Dreadnought easily pulled apart the remaining heavy weapon marines, its momentum carrying it towards the Southern Rhino. The Despoilers though saw a much tougher fight, as the Poisoners held their own. Both sides hacked apart enemies, and although the Despoilers won, the Poisoners held their nerve, keeping them locked up in combat. The Rampagers fight was much more one-sided, with the Maniacs tearing apart 15 of the Tactical Marines in a brutal display of butchery. However, the Tacticals were true believers and would rather die than flee. They successfully clubbed another Rampager to death with their bolters, and then held the elite Astartes in place. Both sides were still deadlocked, and still no objectives had been scored. And although the World Eaters were killing my units, I was locking them up in key areas, stalling their charge, and hopefully giving me room to manoeuvre. Turn 2 ended with 0 each once again. Turn 3 would require some big moves from the pair of us if either of us had any hope of scoring. AJ was absolutely chewing through my units, so naturally I went for the traditional Sean Hail Mary play. My remaining Rhinos speared forward, while the Land Raiders moved to bring their last cannons to bear on both the enemy Land Raider and remaining Dreadnoughts. Harbinger Squad, knowing the tacticals were not long for this world, gunned their jump packs backward, ready to counter whatever move the Rampagers would make next, potentially scoring Vanguard if the Rampagers went for the objective. Commander Samoth, in suitably grim fashion, ordered the tacticals to storm from their Rhino and rush into the centre of the World Eater's army, claiming the objective as they did so. He knew these warriors were unlikely to survive, but Samoth was willing to sacrifice anything in the name of victory. Both the Land Raiders deployed ramps and unleashed the Terminators within. The Tall Grasses, led by Imbal, headed for the enemy Land Raider, which caused the central dreadnought to flee backward, while Samoth himself and the Silent Shroud stalked towards its sibling, their power scythes and claws sparking into horrific life. The Land Raiders poured fire into the dreadnought and the enemy armour, the dreadnought suffering several dreadful wounds but still remaining standing, while the enemy Land Raider returned fire on my own, its last cannons ripping through the cockpit and slaying the driver in a deluge of laser death. Not my Land Raiders. Finest moment, I think you'll agree. Samoth roared across the box, count the 7, and charged forward into the massive enemy Contemptor, his lightning claws gleaming neon in the dust and smoke, followed swiftly by his silent protectors. Hearing their leader's call, the Tall Grasses gunned their chain fists and cannoned into the enemy Land Raider. They peeled the tank open like an overripe fruit and butchered the World Eaters within, leaving the vehicle a burning hulk. The glowering armoured giants then stalked into the ruins, eyeing the Land Raider containing Kharn himself. The Rampagers, as expected, sliced apart the remaining tacticals, but not before the heroic sergeant beheaded one of the berserkers in return. They then lunged forward, ignoring the objective completely and making for my destroyers. The Despoilers and Poisoners continue to hack at each other with venom, several World Eaters dying under the Death Guard's chainswords before hacking apart all but the Poison Master himself. Seeing his chances of victory suddenly vanish, the Poison Master routed and fled. However, the Despoilers were too wrapped up in hacking at the corpses of their now defeated enemy to pursue him. Combat between my Praetor and the Dreadnought I thought I had in the bag. All my models were weapon skill 5. Samoth had rending 6+ and 7 attacks, while the Death Shroud had 9 attacks between them, all at strength 5 with breaching 5+. Surely these guys could easily handle one wounded Contemptor. This, military historians will agree, was Sean's third and greatest mistake. Samoth tore armour from the hulking machine, scoring 2 rending wounds, while the Death Shroud scored another 2 with their heavy sides. However, the Contemptor crushed the head of one of the elite Death Guard in its massive fists. I lost the combat by 1. Surely my Leadership 10 Praetor can handle a simple -1 leadership test. This, military historians will agree, was Sean's fourth and probably most surprising mistake. I rolled a double 6. My commander and his elite bodyguard routed. The Death Shroud grabbed their commander and pulled him away from the combat. The Dreadnought, also no doubt surprised by this strange turn of events, ignored the fleeing Terminators and stalked towards the central Land Raider. This took a turn. Not gonna lie, I thought I had that combat easily in the bag, and now my primary combat unit was booking it in the opposite direction of the fight. At the start of his turn, AJ's Mortificator fully repaired the Fellblade, undoing all the damage dealt by the Achilles. Destroying it now would simply be impossible. His army pivoted, getting into position for some key charges. The Rampagers continued toward my destroyers, who promptly reacted away, keen to get a round of volley fire in when the inevitable charge hit. The Contemptors prowled toward my central Land Raider, while the units in AJ's deployment zone all moved to zone down my Rhino in tacticals. The tactical's fate would not be decided with gunfire though, as Kharn himself led the second squad of Rampagers from his Land Raider. I was forced to react away from the objective to stop the maniacal Marines claiming a Vanguard kill on me. The Fellblade and Land Raider annihilated the Rhino, the heavy fire causing the personnel carrier to crack open like a blister, fire venting from it in a thick black plume. AJ then chose to go straight to charges in typical World Eater fashion. The Contemptors slammed into my Land Raider. Kharn and his followers meanwhile easily closed the distance, Gorechild roaring into monstrous life, while the Despoilers chased down my fleeing Poison Master. The Rampagers attempted to close on my destroyers, but came under an apocalyptic amount of fire from the Moritat and his compatriots. Volkite beams, billowing flames and rad missiles rained down on the Berserk Marines, killing the majority of them and phaging them in the process. They were now toughness 3. However, their momentum carried them through the flames and into the destroyers' ranks. Battle was joined all across the battlefield, and not a single bit of it was looking good for my Death Guard. The Despoilers easily slew the Poison Master, kicking his bloody corpse aside as they loped forward. The Rampagers and Destroyers traded blows, and although the Rampagers were the more skilled warriors, their phage status made them easy pickings for the Destroyers. The combat was close, but the Rampagers took it, and the Destroyers routed and fled backward, hitting the board edge. However, surprising everyone, they held their nerve on the leadership test and chose to remain in the battle, becoming suppressed instead. They were still in the game. This was actually great for me. The majority of my destroyers actually had template weapons, so the suppressed status actually wouldn't impact them at all. This was the faint glimmer of hope I needed to keep going. AJ's Rampagers attempted to pursue, but the radiation was starting to work its ill effects on them, and they failed to catch the black armoured Astartes. Gorechild roared into violent life as Kharn smoked bone armoured Astartes with abandon, easily laying low 4 of the tacticals immediately. And whilst the beleaguered Death Guard did pull a Rampager down with their knives and fists, the Berserk Marines utterly butchered the squad, leaving no survivors. The Butcher's nails hammered in their skulls, demanding they charge forward, but Kharn growled for them to consolidate back towards their own objective, his terrifying presence cowing even the Berserker Rampagers. Finally, the Contemptors pulled apart the Land Raider, the giant machines crushing the crew with ease. The Southern Contemptor consolidated towards my routing Praetor, while its cousin did something I did not expect, wander happily onto AJ's objective. I forgot that Dreadnoughts could score. What an absolute tool I am. This, military historians will agree, was my biggest mistake of the game. This turn had been absolutely massive for AJ. He had won all of the combats on the table, and he had killed or routed the majority of my most effective units, barring my Grave Wardens. And he got the sneakiest of 5 points with the sneakiest of Contemptor Dreadnought consolidations. AJ was absolutely dominating this battle, and I needed to do something huge in order to try and secure a victory. Turn 3 ended with both AJ and myself scoring, 7-5. The Death Guard held the points advantage, but the World Eaters were still unbelievably strong. With so few combat effective units left, I had to make sure my plan was watertight. Knowing that, I moved my Grave Wardens towards Kharn and his Rampagers. My Rhino and Tacticals moved to defend the objective in my own deployment zone, while my Destroyers gunned towards the sickly Rampagers. My plan was to clear my deployment zone, lock down the objective, and try to kill as many smaller units as I could. Meanwhile, I would try to rout Kharn off his objective, maybe scoring Vanguard, maybe getting my Terminators onto that objective in turn. A lot of things would need to go very, very right for this plan to work. My Praetor continued to be of no help whatsoever, and fled backward once more. My Destroyers opened fire on the Rampagers, hurling Volkite, Phosphex and fire into the beleaguered Berserkers, slaying every last one of them. However, the Centurion still stood, his armour blackened, his skin blistering and melting, but still standing. The Tall Grasses fired their assault launchers into Kharn's troops, the poison fusillade and alchemical flames easily laying low several of them. Annoyingly, both Kharn and the Centurion passed their leadership tests despite the losses. The Tacticals and Rhino emptied all their weapons into the Dreadnought, leaving it on a single wound. With no other choice before me, I declared some exceptionally risky charges against World Eaters. My Tacticals drew their Kukra daggers and lunged at the Dreadnought, while my Centurion and Terminators bulldozed into the Rampagers. The Terminators unleashed more poison and alchemical fire in the volley attack, claiming more of the elite Astartes. Kharn cackled hoarsely at the chaos, raising Gorechild to strike. The Morata and Destroyers, seeing the enemy Centurion struggling, charged forward, their own chain swords screaming. The Tacticals and Dreadnought duelled, the massive lumbering World Eater crushing 2 before the Tactical Sergeant stabbed his power sword into the machine's side. The sparking blade hit a critical power conduit and caused the Dreadnought to explode violently. Several Tacticals fell while the Rhino's tracks were fused together, pinning it. However, I had killed the Dreadnought. Part 1 of the plan had succeeded. The Destroyers surrounded the Centurion, hacking and slashing at his ornate armour, before Malak Hamavet raised his Serpentas and blew the beleaguered commander's head clean from his shoulders. They then consolidated toward the Tacticals in support. Part 2 of the plan in the bag. The Tall Grasses and the Rampagers duelled as Kharn tried to force his way to Imbal. Knowing he couldn't outfight the 12th Legion's greatest warrior, Imbal laid into the Rampagers with his scythe instead. Numerous World Eaters fell to the scythe and chain fists of the Death Guard, but were only able to pull down one of the hulking Terminators in return. However, They won the combat by a slim margin, and once again, the leadership skills of my Death Guard fell short. The tall grasses routed. Military historians will agree that this is what is most commonly described in military terminology as a boo-boo. The hulking Terminators fled backward towards their own deployment zone, but their armour made them painfully slow, and Kharn and his warriors easily caught up, the Butcher's nails spiking their adrenaline to insane levels. However, in my end phase, all squads lost their various statuses, making them fully combat effective once more. AJ's turn 4 saw a flurry of movement from his World Eaters, with all units that could spearing towards my deployment zone. The Fellblade, however, had successfully boxed itself in with all the vehicle wrecks it had created in the previous turns. First world problems, am I right? Most worryingly, his remaining Dreadnought lunged towards the objective, threatening to score another 5 points. Foregoing any shooting due to his whole army rushing, the Contemptor charged my Rhino. The carrier sprayed bolter fire and havoc shells into the towering machine, but to no avail. The Dreadnought flipped the tank over, tearing its tracks off in a flurry of violence. It then stomped onto the objective, staring down the nearby tactical squad, daring them to respond. Kharn seized my Centurion and hurled him into the middle of the melee, the Terminators and Rampagers instinctively backing up to give their champions room. He demanded the Centurion get up and face him, which Imbal spitefully accepted. Facing off, the two warriors circled each other, Imbal's scythe sparking wickedly, while Kharn sporadically gunned Gorechild's whirring, blood-splattered teeth. AJ chose violent overkill, confident Kharn could slay Imbal quickly, allowing his remaining wounds to overspill onto my Terminators. Knowing my Centurion was outclassed even with Paragon of Battle, I chose the Death Guard specific gambit Steadfast Resilience, setting my toughness to Kharn's weapon skill. My Centurion was now toughness 7. My Centurion won the focus roll and struck at Kharn with his scythe, scoring a wound on the Berserker. Kharn struck back but was only able to score 1 wound in kind as well. Overconfident, my Centurion then attempted to seize the initiative, with Kharn choosing Flurry of Blows. This time, fortune favoured the World Eater, and Kharn scored 3 critical hits, easily beheading Imbal. Emboldened, the Rampagers pulled down 2 more Terminators, who failed to inflict any damage in return. The tall grasses routed again and fled, and the Rampagers easily caught them once more. They were not long for this world, it seemed. Oh dear. This turn had gone wildly wrong incredibly quickly. So, at this point, it's probably quite obvious that I could not win, but there were some very specific conditions in which I could possibly maybe scrape out a draw. Turn 4 ended with the World Eaters taking the lead. The score was now 7-10 with one final turn to play. All my eggs were in the basket of scoring last man standing, which in this mission is worth a weighty 3 points. If I could remove AJ's despoilers, his dreadnoughts, his mortificator and tacticals, and have my Terminators lose their status and then survive whatever response he could dish out in his turn 5, I could potentially bag 3 points and force him into a bloody stalemate. My Praetor and Death Shroud closed on the despoilers, hoping to kill them with their shooting and then charge the tacticals behind them. My tacticals drew up their bolters ready to open fire on the dreadnought, and my destroyers soared overhead ready to rain down all their weapons on the mortificator and his tacticals. I did briefly consider shooting at the dreadnought with the destroyers in the hope of maybe scoring Vanguard, but the majority of their weapons were either too weak or poison based to do anything effective against the Contemptor. So I aimed at the mortificator and the tacticals instead. Plus, if really needed, they could potentially charge the Contemptor and score Vanguard that way. Samoth ordered the Death Shroud to open fire, jets of green poison death exploding from their wrist-mounted weapons. The despoilers vanished in a cloud of emerald fury, screaming as their bodies melted and lungs boiled with superheated gas. But to Samoth's fury, one despoiler survived, racked with poison and covered in gore, but defiant. A storm of phosphex fire enveloped the tactical squad led by the Mortificator, annihilating most of the squad utterly. But again, the World Eaters held their nerve, refusing to budge under the hideous assault. The tacticals were much luckier, however, raining a storm of bolter shells onto the dreadnought, its armour warping and cracking finally under the firestorm. It collapsed, its hull smoking and its interred occupant finally slain. With a roar of petulant rage, Samoth slammed into the lone despoiler, his power claws tearing the unfortunate Marine apart in a fit of fury worthy of a World Eater. Malak Hamavet commanded his squad to open fire once more, killing more tacticals but not the whole squad. Throwing caution to the wind, he ordered his destroyers to charge, smashing into the Mortificator. But the combat went wildly wrong, with the remaining destroyers dying to the tactical's assault, while the Mortificator stabbed Malak with his corpusent stave through the heart, ending the Moritat's futile assault there and then. Finally, to put the final nail in the coffin, Kharn hacked apart the remaining Grave Wardens, ending my army's chances there and then. Knowing my final gambit had failed, I accepted the inevitable and conceded. AJ had won a mighty victory, and I bowed to his superior heresy skills. With last man standing, AJ had won convincingly. The final score was 7-13 for the 12th Legion. That game was absolutely amazing. It was thoroughly brutal and grim, and AJ played his World Eaters to perfection. I could blame bad dice rolls, I could blame bad luck, but when it comes right down to it, AJ simply played that game better. He followed the classic 12th Legion mantra of moving forward and closing with the enemy as quickly as possible. And it saw him take today's victory convincingly. And that's why I love Horus Heresy. The game was so full of little stories and crazy little dramas. The duel between the Fellblade and the Achilles, the despoilers rising from the sand to charge at my Milta team, my Praetor fleeing from the Contemptor, the hideous and costly battle between the Rampagers and the Destroyers, and of course, Kharn doing what Kharn does best and taking names with Gorechild. Even losing, that game was furiously good fun, and I would play it again in a heartbeat. AJ, your card's marked, the 14th are coming for you, and this time we're bringing bigger and longer ranged guns. How many Knight Porphyrion can I squeeze into one list? Horus Heresy is great because of players like AJ. Plus, getting to see Kharn the Bloody mow through your own army is actually thoroughly entertaining. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all next time. Cheers.